Hi, everyone, and welcome back to week 2 of our public policy module. Last week, we explored what public policy is and why it matters. This week, we're moving into the processes, how governments actually make decisions, and how research connects with these processes. We'll focus on 3 key areas: the policy cycle, which breaks down the stages of decision making; policy instruments, the tools governments use to put decisions into action; and policy statements, the formal documents that set out and authorise those choices. To ground these ideas, we'll also take a close look at Indigenous policy in Australia, exploring both the risks of applying frameworks without genuine engagement and opportunities of more collaborative and ethical approaches. By the end of this week, you should be able to describe the stages of the policy cycle, identify the key instruments governments use, explain the role and structure of policy statements, and map where research can add value throughout the policy process. Policy can feel messy, shaped by politics, crises, or competing interests. The policy cycle simplifies this complexity. It's not a perfect model, but it helps us see where research can make a difference. In this module, we're using an 8-stage model. Firstly, identifying issues, recognizing problems governments need to address. Policy analysis, weighing options and trade-offs. Choosing instruments, deciding which tools to use, such as laws, services, or incentives. Consultation, engaging with stakeholders and communities. Coordination, aligning efforts across departments and levels of government. 6, decisions, formal choices by ministers, cabinets, or parliaments. 7, implementation, turning decisions into action through programs, legislation, and delivery. And lastly, evaluation, assessing outcomes and feeding lessons back into the cycle. At each stage, research has a role to play, from highlighting problems to informing options to evaluating effectiveness. If the policy cycle explains when choices are made, policy instruments explain how those choices are carried out. This week, we also examine Indigenous policy in Australia. It offers a clear example of how frameworks like the cycle, instruments, and statements can succeed or fail, depending on whether they genuinely engage communities. Too often, Indigenous policies have relied heavily on regulation and externally designed programs, with limited consultation. For researchers, this underlines the importance of ethical, collaborative approaches and reminds us that evidence alone is not enough. It must be aligned with community priorities and values. So as you work through this week, think carefully about where your research connects with the policy process. Is it in problem identification, in program design, in evaluation? Recognizing those entry points can make your work far more impactful. I look forward to reading your reflections and seeing how you connect your research to the policy cycle, instruments, and statements. Let's get started. Thank you once again and enjoy.